Hello again, Sandwich and all of Cape Cod. I'm Greg Anderson. You know, there's some big decisions Cape Cod voters will be making Tuesday, November 8th. One of them will be for your choice of the next Barnstable County Sheriff. This is a big deal and certainly a race you want to learn about if you haven't already. There are two vastly different candidates seeking this position after 23 years of Sheriff Jim Cummings on the job. This person will oversee public safety, including the oversight of the correctional facility that houses a maximum of 588 inmates. I'd like to introduce you to one of those two that are running for this office. Representative Whelan, how are you?
I'm doing great, Greg. Thank you very much for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak with you and your audience.
Now, can I call you Representative Whelan, Tim?
Call me Tim.
Did I hear you say Timmy when you came in and introduced yourself to Brian?
Yeah.
I like that.
Timmy Whelan. Timmy Whelan. I'm a regular guy. I don't, titles don't mean a lot to me. What's inside of someone means more to me than any title in the world.
So this is not the first time, obviously, you've run for office. Right. You are currently a state representative in the 1st Barnstable District.
Yes, sir.
How is the campaign going for you?
Campaign's going better than I could have ever expected, but it's not going that way just based on pure luck. It's going that way based on hard work. Not only the hard work that I've been putting in, I have a tremendous army of volunteers that number in the hundreds. Mm-hmm. And I think that the folks here in Sandwich and the folks around the Upper Cape and the entirety of Cape Cod have seen us already or will be seeing us soon when we have our large standouts in the area to try and get our name out.
You would be the 35th sheriff in Barnstable County.
I give you credit for doing that research. 35th. Okay.
35th in the history. How would most recently with Sheriff Cummings in the job, and he is not running again, how would your administration be different than his? Just enter that topic in any way, any area.
Sure, that's a very deep question, and I really appreciate that, Greg. First off, I'm my own man. I stand on my own 2 feet, and I have my own. I come into this position, if I'm blessed with the endorsement of the voters on November 8th, I come into this role with a background that's very similar to Sheriff Cummings, but my life experiences are no doubt different. I come in with a different set of life experiences. I'm a different generation. So I come in with an eye toward changing a few things. One of the real important things for me too, though, Greg, is coming in with just following rules for good management. Good management is that we come in the day after the election, if I'm blessed with the endorsement of the voters, is I'm going to be assembling a transition team. And I'm going to have people from the healthcare industry. I'm going to have people from clinicians, from mental health providers. I'm going to have non-government organizations here in the Cape that are going to be part of this process, as well as correctional and law enforcement officials and past government officials. And we're going to sit down and we're going to develop a plan and we're going to come up with a program, what we need to change in the first 90 days, what we need to change in the first 6 months, what we need to change in a year. And it's not a matter of me just coming up with these ideas on my own. I'm a big believer that groupthink is always superior to I think. Bringing a bunch of really solid professionals with a lot of experience together, and we're going to do an examination of every provision of service that Sheriff's Department offers, and we're going to look at ways that we can improve. I know one of the top things that I have to do going in the door right away is I have to become the greatest job recruiter in the history of recruiters. Mm-hmm. The department is suffering right now from a severe lack of manpower within the correctional facility.
Can you specifically tell me what jobs specifically?
Sure, the correctional staff, and then the clinical staff too. But it's primarily the correctional staff. And if you check, and there are a lot of people here that live in Sandwich and in the Upper Cape region that work there, they'll be the first ones to tell you that many of the people there are subject to being forced to work an extra overtime shift. They show up to work a day shift, well, guess what? You stay in until 11 p.m. That's happening to them sometimes 2, 3, 4 times a week. That negatively impacts the morale. They're losing even further staff because how can you have a life? How can you have a family life? How can you raise your kids when that's happening? And then lastly, and very important, is when people are tired and run down, mistakes happen, and we can't afford the mistakes because we have to look after the safety and the welfare of those charged to our care to the very, very best of our ability. So I would say probably, Greg, that the number one thing that I do within the first 90 days is I am beating down every door that I can to try and find qualified people to come and work for that office, get them trained and get them working inside and get them the supports and the training that they need, and then boost the morale and keep people there working.
So let's talk about resources, particularly funding. You know, obviously you need the people, but you also need the resources in order to train them and educate them and support them. Give the current administration a grade, if you will. How is that office right now as it relates to deploying resources in the correct areas?
So I think that they're operating somewhere, if I were to grade them, that's a really tough thing to do. I would say that they're probably in the A- to an A category, because you got to remember that they don't just run the correctional facility. The correctional facility is the centerpiece, and it's likely one of the absolute most important things that we do, because you're looking after the care of an average count of 170 incarcerated people on a daily basis, 170 people. They also run an E911 dispatch center. They have a BCI division which responds to crime scenes, to process crime scenes, to assist in the prosecution of crimes, document serious car crashes for insurance cases and prosecutions. They offer a canine patrol, and they just started a patrol division. And the canine patrol and the patrol division are critically important because a lot of our police departments here on the Cape are suffering severe staffing shortages. The Barnstable County Sheriff's Office provides almost full-time 1 or 2 deputies down to the town of Falmouth, for the Falmouth Police Department, to support them because they're suffering from critical manpower shortages. I'm friends with every single chief on Cape Cod, and I've spoken to every single chief on Cape Cod about what their needs, police chief, about what their needs are. They tell me time and again that 2 things that they need is for the jail to take safe keeps, and number 2, right behind that, is to have resources available, our regional resources that we can provide to help them. Particularly when you get down Cape, it becomes very, very important, because you have patrol officers that sometimes have to respond to serious calls, domestic violence incidents, dangerous calls, and they're responding by themselves, and that's unsafe. I know that firsthand.
Yeah, and you were a state police sergeant.
Yes, sir. Yep.
And a correctional officer.
Yes, sir.
At one point. So let's talk a little bit about resources as it relates to a budget. If you were to be handed a blank sheet of paper to say, okay, here's your budget, here's where you want to start allocating things, how much of your budget will look like Jim Cummings' budget, if you will, in terms of those allocations?
That's really, so what it boils down to is this in a lot of cases, Greg, is most public agencies like the Sheriff's Office, and I know certainly with the Massachusetts State Police, their budget, about 85-ish% of their budget is consumed by payroll and benefit packages for their employees.
Right.
So that leaves you on average 15% of a budget of discretionary spending. The Sheriff's Office budget, I believe last year, was $33 million. I know this because I sit on the House Committee on Ways and Means, and I helped draft a $50 billion budget every single year. Well, it was $50 billion this past one, 48.6, I think, the year before. Dealing with those numbers, trust me, a $33 million budget is not going to be difficult for me to work with. But that leaves discretionary spending somewhere in the area, 15% would be $4.95 million. What are we going to be looking to do with that? We're going to be looking certainly to make sure that we're providing the best programming available. We're going to hire clinicians to make sure that we have crisis counselors available for the incarcerated people as well as the staff for at least 16 hours a day. One of the things that I've seen during my tour of the Plymouth County Correctional Facility was in the area where they have, it's like isolation units for people who are going through serious crisis and they're dangerous and acting out. They have crisis counselors on staff there every single day. I definitely want to do that as well because you can work people through some of their problems if you do it correctly. And then the other thing I want to do is, again, in consultation with the police chiefs, find out how we can continue to expand our patrol offerings and other services that we provide to best suit the public safety priorities that they have in their communities. Here's one thing that's an example that very rarely comes out. I spoke with the fire chiefs, and the Sheriff's Office provides technical services for the installation of radios, lights, and sirens in police vehicles for municipal police departments, but they don't do it for fire departments. If I can get in there, if I can provide that service, that's going to save the taxpayers in Sandwich, in Bourne, in Mashpee, in Falmouth, Barnstable. It's going to across the Cape. It'll save them a lot of money because then they don't have to hire a third party to do those installs.
So your challenger has said publicly that she feels Hills, the current office, sheriff's office, is more of a regional police agency, not true to the mission of the office. How do you speak to that?
So she's also saying that the position is not law enforcement, and nothing could be further from the truth. I think that any casual listener realizes that the office of a sheriff has been law enforcement since the days of the Magna Carta and the Sheriff of Nottingham. True to that point, and I'm very glad that you brought this up, Greg, I was one of the 6 legislators that sat and developed the language, the final language on the police reform law that we passed in 2020. Part of that was the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, which licenses and certifies every police officer in the Commonwealth. There's a reason we called it the Peace Officer Standards and Training, not Police Officer Standards and Training, and that's because of deputy sheriffs. And not only that, in the definitions under, I believe it's chapter, if I can remember correctly, chapter 6E of the general law, which establishes post, under the definition of law enforcement officer, we include deputy sheriffs by name in there. So that position is proven wrong not only by history, but by the endorsement of the entire Massachusetts legislature when we passed that law and the signature of Governor Baker on that piece of legislation as well. So the office of a sheriff is a law enforcement position, hands down, no question.
You've been in the legislature for 8 years. From your office on Beacon Hill, you do have an office up there,
Yes,
right?
sir, I do.
Is it a cube? I'm thinking...
It was my first 4 years. Now I graduated from a cube to a closet.
Nice.
So, yeah, geez,
Excellent.
I'm moving on up to the east side, right?
Not in the corner office. That's someone
Right.
else's space.
Right.
Let's talk about funding appropriations. Are they adequate? Have they been adequate for the sheriff's office from your perspective as a legislator?
From my perspective as a legislator, I believe that particularly under the Baker-Polito administration in these past 8 years, we've seen our economy has really thrived. I mean, we had the severe hiccup economically of COVID, but boy, are we coming roaring back right now. So I will tell you from my position as a legislator that I believe that the funding has been adequate. The day that I get sworn in as a sheriff, heck no, we need more. We need more money, and we need it now because we have a mission that we have to accomplish here. Yeah. And the really good thing, Greg, is I sit on the committee that writes the budget. I have relationships with every single legislator on Beacon Hill. I can go up there, I can call them, I go out socially with many of them for dinner. I have those relationships, so when I need more resources from Beacon Hill to come down to the Barnstable County Sheriff's Office so that we can provide better services to keep Cape Codders safe and to provide better services to those incarcerated and entrusted to our care, I'm the person that can do that because over 8 years I've built great relationships on both sides of the aisle in that building.
Commonwealth voters are about to vote in a new governor. Governor Baker is not running again. We all know that. You are a Republican
Yes, sir.
state representative. Should you become the next sheriff, and should Maura Healey become the next governor, with the Democratic power up on Beacon Hill that may shift a little bit, does a Democratic governor and power up on Beacon Hill concern you if you were to become sheriff?
Not in the slightest. I have a good working relationship with Attorney General Healey. I have since day one. And we have each other's cell phone numbers. We reached out to each other in the past. And she was an ally for us, for those of us with an interest in supporting law enforcement. She was an ally for us when we were doing the police reform legislation. She reached out to my office directly and communicated with us some support on particular points of light as it related to no-knock search warrants and facial recognition technologies. She reached out directly to me, to my office, and was very, very supportive. I am going to vote for Jeff Deal. I'm a Republican. I am going to vote for Jeff Deal as the Republican candidate for that office. Should Jeff Deal not succeed and Maura Healey is our next governor, I trust that the relationship, and again, it's a relationship built on trust, a good working relationship. I will be able to pick up the phone and call her at any time, and I know that she'll listen, as Jeff Deal would too.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, we do not have maximum security on the Cape, correct?
They have medium security, minimum security. They do not have work release. Most pretrial has always been kind of managed at a maximum security type level in my experience.
Okay.
And the reason why you do that, now the pretrial people, you think of, for instance, 125, after he committed that horrible murder of my friend Sean Gannon. You have people that are awaiting trial for murder and other heinous crimes who are being held without bail or unable to make bail. So they do have very secure settings within the Barnstable County Correctional Facility.
Are we doing enough? The correctional officer function, and I've known a couple in my life, that ain't an easy job.
Very, very difficult job. We cannot do enough to support and appreciate the correctional officers who do a very, very difficult job, and they get almost no recognition in the community. And I will fight to make sure that they get more recognition for the work that they do.
So there's recognition, but then there's also this officer is dealing with something mentally, post-traumatic. I mean, I'm thinking there's some serious stuff that they see, even just going to work, being around people who are locked up. There's just that emotional piece. What would you do? Well, first of all, do we do enough to support them now? Mentally, coaching, training, support?
I'm so happy that you brought this up, Greg. I am so happy you brought this up. My first month working at the age of 19 as a corrections officer at the Worcester County Jail, I had to cut someone down who had hung himself in a cell on the midnight shift. I've experienced the trauma firsthand, and I've used, particularly during my career with the state police, I've used the employee assistance program that the state police offer, and I will tell anyone, I am proud that I did, and I tell anyone that works in the field to use the resources that are available. That is one of the top things on the list that I'm going to be looking at if I'm elected as your next sheriff, is making sure that we have a very vigorous EAP or EAU program, as they call it, available to the staff. And I've already talked to a couple staff members going around knocking on doors around the district. I was in Falmouth, and one of the women that works there, that's a corrections officer, I sat in her back deck and talked to her for 25 minutes about trying to establish a team of crisis counselors or peer counselors that are available for the staff members in there, because it is an incredibly difficult job. I did it for 5 years. I don't know if I could have done a whole career there just because of
that destroys marriages. That's a tough thing.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's very, very tough. And the highest rate of suicide in the public safety profession are corrections officers.
I didn't know that.
It is.
Not surprised, but I didn't know that.
Yep. My wife works for the Department of Correction and the State Department of Correction, and the thing that I see time and again, hearing through her, are issues that they have with staff members there that are dealing with, and again, it's not just suicide, but it's acts of self-harm, people who are self-medicating. And when they go home and they're self-medicating, and just as you said, then that destroys marriages, and that further takes them down into a very dark place. We have to do better, because we rely on these people to keep us safe, and they do a great job.
Tim, let me ask you this. You're out on the streets. You have been a politician. You ran for office. You are in office right now, but you're in the middle of a campaign. As I said at the top of the show, I am imploring people to pay attention to these races, and this race in particular. But I believe that there are people out there who kind of like, I don't really know what the sheriff's office does. I don't really know why this matters to me. Fine, I'll just check him because I like the last name. What is it that you are hearing from the average neighbor of ours about your race? Do you have to kind of get their attention and say, no, this is important? Or do people come to you with, here's my concern, can you address it? And if so, what are you hearing?
So the number one thing that I'm hearing is people want to see better services provided to the incarcerated population at the jail to help them fix what might be going wrong in their head. We know about 85% statistically of the incarcerated population are suffering from either substance use disorder or mental health concerns, and we have to do even better to make sure that we provide them the supports. But then there are things, there are moves that the Sheriff's Office has made. Starting back in 2012, they started a medically assisted treatment program with the use of Vivitrol. Most recently, they started bringing in Suboxone and Methadone as well. Studies have proven, and I've read through these studies and I've done the research, and I've seen that I believe it's somewhere around an 80% just north of 80% success rate when people who are incarcerated, when they receive the medication that they require to help them through their substance use disorder, and then they continue to receive it out in the community, which the Sheriff's Office helps ensure by using local non-government organizations. They continue to receive the medication for up to 6 months and beyond and release, that they do not repeat, they do not reoffend, and they do not come back. And that's one of the things that we should be doing, and we should be doing better. And that's going to be one of my top priorities. As well as I mentioned earlier, the second thing that I hear over and over and over again after what we went through about 2 years ago is people on Cape Cod back the blue. They want us to be an asset. They want us to do whatever we can to support their municipal police departments in helping to keep our communities safe. We look at what's going on in other parts of the world, and it scares a lot of people. They see what's going on in San Francisco, they see what's going on in Philadelphia or in Lower Manhattan, and it scares them. They don't want Cape Cod to look like that. When I was first moved to the Cape, I was working out of the State Police Barracks in Springfield. I was driving from Brewster to Springfield every day for work. And we were responding to 4 or 5 shootings on a shift in the city of Springfield. And I would come back over the bridge and I would thank God that I lived on Cape Cod. Mm-hmm. We can't let Cape Cod look like some of these other places. And I will fight to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Some of those other places that you're referring to, race is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
How does race factor into public safety on the Cape? Do we have a racial problem on the Cape, in your opinion?
That's a very difficult question. It would depend upon who you speak to. I believe that the police departments here in the Cape and that the Sheriff's Office have done so much to reach out to communities of color across the Cape, to reach out to immigrant communities across the Cape, and to build those bonds and to make sure that we have a joint level of trust among us. And I think that here on Cape Cod, we're doing it better than a lot of other places from what I'm seeing. And I got to give credit to Sheriff Cummings, I got to give credit to DA O'Keefe, and all of our police chiefs across the Cape, as well as to members of those communities that I spoke of earlier, communities of color, the immigrant communities, for wanting to build those bonds and strengthen them.
Let's talk a little bit about, I was taken on your website, you had referenced, getting back to the addiction piece, your parents were both alcoholics. Your mother suffered from manic depression. Mm-hmm. So addiction and mental health is a personal thing for you.
Yes, it is.
How will you address this? And I know you've spoken to us to this on a couple of different levels, but personally, this is a big deal for you as it relates to addiction and mental health. Mm-hmm. How are you going to do it differently? How are you going to address that within the correctional system differently?
Sure. Well, to open up, and I'm glad you brought up my parents' story because I think it's very important. I was speaking at the International Overdose Awareness Day vigil that they had in South Yarmouth, and for the second year in a row, last year was the first time I told anyone that story. My sister, my brother, and I, of course, know it very well.
Sure.
And it took a while. My parents are long deceased, and I think that if they were here, they would be very proud that I was able to use their story. And yes, as many of your listeners, I'm sure, have been through a like situation as an adult children of alcoholics. I'm an ACA. And I saw my parents eventually find their recovery, and I've seen the power of recovery. They were functioning alcoholics through their entire life. They worked full-time jobs. They never missed a day of work, but they were indeed alcoholics, and it caused problems at home. And my father, through all of it, he would drive me to my Alateen meetings because I needed it. And I can't imagine the embarrassment that he must have felt.
Sure.
But he continued to drive me every week because he knew that that's what I needed. So what do I take from that? I take from that I've seen substance use disorder, I've seen alcoholism, what it can do to really, really good people, really good families. And I know that recovery lies within, and sometimes you just need a little bit of help to get there. And that's why this absolutely is personal for me. I've spoken with the clinical staff over at the Sheriff's Office, and I've told them that we are going to be placing an even higher priority on the provision of services there, and we're going to be working, again, I mentioned, with the non-government organizations to bring them in and get their expertise involved as well. What we found, Greg, is that COVID turned the provision of these services on its ear. Some of these services are just now beginning to come back to in-person services as of October 1st within the facility. When I get in there, if I'm blessed with that vote, anything that is still not in person is going to be in person right away, because the value of in-person therapy, in-person services versus trying to do it on a tablet, it's a giant gulf there that you have to cross. Yeah. I've spoken with veteran service organizations here on the Cape as well. We have incarcerated veterans that are suffering from the effects of what they've seen during the course of their services, cumulative post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah. We have to get them in the facility to get involved, start delivering these services pre-release, because if we don't start trying to get them connected pre-release, then you're setting them up to fail post-release, and they're only going to come back again.
Yeah. I need to ask you one question about the use of the sheriff's office boat.
Yep.
Because your challenger has kind of really made this a big deal. Yep. in the context of utilizing resources inappropriately. So this is George Regan's wedding. It was a private wedding over the summer. The sheriff's office boat, sheriff's department boat, was used as an escort. What's your take on that? And if you were sheriff at that time, would you have said, let's do it, or not right?
So the boat was out on patrol for, I believe it was either an 8 or a 12-hour patrol that day anyways, and it took 10 minutes off of its regular patrol, 10 minutes, to go in with lights and siren going, and then come back out and continue its patrol. The state police with their helicopters, and I know because I've called them a number of times as well, when you have like community events, well-attended events, even VIP events, they provide services. It's a public relations thing that you do to build up goodwill for the department within certain communities. Now, using it for a private wedding, let me tell you right up front, I was not at the wedding. I wasn't invited. I definitely wasn't there. I found out about it when it was brought to my attention that it was in the newspaper. I think that we're kind of turning a bit of a mountain into a molehill, but let me tell you this is the difference between someone who has actual public safety experience and someone who doesn't. Immediately the cry from the other side came that that boat would be decommissioned on day one. I heard it on the Pat Desmarais show, and an hour and a half later that boat pulled someone out of the water off a cutty hunk. And 8 days later it pulled someone out of the water who was drowning off of Chappaquiddick. So within 8 days, that boat saved 2 lives. So I'm going to tell you this, I am not going to decommission that boat on day one, but it is absolutely going to be subject to the full top to bottom review that every other aspect of service that that department provides will be, to determine if there's a cost, what the cost is and what the benefit is, and do an analysis and see if we continue the use of the boat. Not just the boat, everywhere else, because that's called good management. It's also called law enforcement experience.
For those who really don't know, like I was saying before, why do I vote for this race? Make your last pitch as we wrap up here. Why vote for Timothy Whelan?
So what I would say is that I am the experienced candidate. We had an event just last night with Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito, and Governor Baker got up and he pointed at my banner and he said, "My God, look at this man's experience and resume. It's once in a lifetime that you will see someone with this kind of a background stepping in to fill a role that is tailor-made to fit him." So I have the experience, I have the background, I have the knowledge. I have the support of virtually every law enforcement agency union on the Cape, and most of the fire unions as well. I have the support of some of the larger police unions across the Cape, State Police Association of Massachusetts, Massachusetts Coalition of Police. I have the support of the Barnstable County Correction Officers Captains Union and the Barnstable County Correctional Officers Union. When that vote was held with the correction officers at the facility, I can tell you that, and I can't remember exactly what the numbers were, but the numbers of votes that I received to receive their endorsement, it was somewhere around 120. My opponent received, I believe it was 3. So the staff that work there, they know who they want. And I've heard it time and again. I was at a road race in Chatham, and I had a woman who works at the sheriff's office. She's a corrections officer, and she came up to me and she said, "You can't lose this race. You're our only hope." So the professional staff that work there, they know who they want. They know my experience. They know what I bring to the table, as do all of our public safety professionals across the Cape, and I have their support. and I'm asking for your support as well. Please show up November 8th and vote Tim Whelan for Barnstable County Sheriff. Also, if you're going to vote early or vote by mail, please, I would be blessed to have your support, and I promise you I am going to work harder than anyone you've ever seen to make sure that you and your family remain safe.
I think you need to work on the passion of your message. Be a little bit more specific, Tim. I'm just suggesting.
I'm Irish.
Yeah.
What can I say? I'm passionate. So thank you very much.
Tim, thank you so
Yes,
much.
sir.
I really appreciate it. And for you, my friends, I really do, as Tim says, get out and vote. November 8th is the date. Go out and vote, and this is a big race to pay attention to. I'm Greg Anderson, and I'll see you soon.
The views expressed in this program are the views of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the SCTV staff or board of directors.